are back for another conversation to highlight a collecting focus that means a lot to me because it was right in my sweet spot as well. We're going to be talking about the junk wax era today. And to do that, I can't think of anybody better to bring on than Junk Wax Heroes. He's a great follow on Twitter if you like the junk wax era. So welcome.
Thanks, man. I'm really happy to be here, man. I'm excited.
I've been following the Twitter account for quite a while because, like many of us in our 30s and 40s, we grew up collecting in the junk wax era. So the types of things that you put out there on Twitter are always meaningful to me. They always strike a chord for me. So I'm excited that we get to have this conversation today. I wanted to start by just getting a feel for why did you start your Junk Wax Heroes Twitter account? What was the inspiration for that?
Well, I think like a lot of people, during the COVID lockdown and everything like that, you start looking back at your life and what made you happy because everybody else was so miserable, right? So I ended up getting back into collecting during the COVID debacle, I suppose. And, you know, I started watching Phil's polls, which I had a really big influence on me. And that was actually before I even opened another pack of cards. But the YouTube algorithm blessed me with a link to Phil's polls, and just watching how, how much fun he was having and how entertaining his clips and stuff like that were. It really kind of planted the seed, I guess. And then I thinking back, it's one of those things. Why did you ever stop collecting, right? But it really opened that door back up to me. And since then, I've been back into it, man. It's been a lot of fun.
So, you mentioned it got you back into it. So when did you collect to start with? What was kind of your collecting history when you were younger?
So I started sort of in the mid 80s. Actually, my brother was collecting coins and stamps at one point in like the mid 80s, and following in your big brother's footsteps sort of thing. And then we got into comic books a little bit, and he stayed more into comics. But I'll never forget, I had somehow acquired a copy of Iron Man #1. And I went down to the local card shop and traded it in and bought a bunch of packs of 1986 Topps football. And that was it for me, man. Ever since then, I have been, other than, the hiatus, I suppose, but that's really what opened the door to me to art collecting. I remember I had a bunch of Jerry Rice rookies, and, Lord only knows what happens to those cards. I'm sure they ended up in my bike spokes and stuff like that. But that's really what opened the door. And ever since then, and then it was such an amazing time in the hobby, too, with, for my era, the junk wax. There are so many great running backs and stuff like that. I got into Walter Payton and Barry Sanders and all those guys. And it really took off watching the hobby take off at the same time. So it was so much fun.
Another man after my own heart. 86 was my first year of collecting as well. I started with baseball that earlier that summer, but then that 86 football release was also one of my favorites. I'm a Bears fan, Central Illinois, and so I was coming off of a Bears Super Bowl the
That's what
year
got me
before.
into it, man.
So that was a perfect timing for me to collect those football cards as well. Now, did you continue? You mentioned starting with football. I collected baseball and football when I was young. I didn't bring on basketball until probably closer to 89.
Okay.
I didn't really have access to any of the basketball releases from 86 to 89 or so in my small town. What did that look like for you? Were you focused only on football at the beginning, or once you got the bug with that football release, did you start to get those other sports too?
Well, I started with football and I stayed with football for a couple of years. It was something I watched with my dad. So that's probably why I first picked it up. Is, those Sunday afternoons with your dad are pretty special, right? And then I started playing basketball, I want to say in about 1989. And naturally, with Michael Jordan and all the other excitement, it was hard not to get swept up into it. Football has always been my number one. Just because that's where I started. But I got pretty heavily into basketball as well. And then I've always dabbled in hockey and baseball. Just, you're at the convenience store, whatever packs they got, man, I'm picking them up.
Very cool. Do you have a favorite set from that era?
I think for football, it's got to be the 86 Topps. I mean, the green sort of field lines in the background. The colors just pop. I love the photography. Basketball, that's a little bit tougher. I'd probably go with maybe 90 Skybox or something like that. I love the ultra 90s graphics going on in the background there.
Yeah, that was a pretty cool set when that came out. It was so much different with all of the different shapes and the different kind of computer generated images. It was a lot different than the other designs that we were seeing at the time. That was one of the reasons I kind of liked the Panini Status release that came out a few years ago, because when the first time I saw that, it immediately gave me, flashbacks to the 90 and 91 Skybox sets from back in the junk wax era. I don't know if you're familiar with that status set or not, but it's one of my favorites because of the nostalgia that it brings from those Skybox sets.
That's great. I'm not familiar with that set specifically, but I think, Skybox really opened the door to those sort of computer graphical designs. And you can see, I mean, they had to have had an influence on the inserts and everything else going on in the hobby.
So you collected as a kid, you kind of focused on football, expanded a little bit into basketball when you were younger, and then you mentioned a break. What did that break look like for you?
Well, you get into that 13 to 15-year-old age. I was more into playing basketball, I suppose, than collecting basketball. And then, of course, your disposable income starts going to your girlfriend instead of to the hobby shop, I suppose. So at that point, unfortunately, that's where it took me.
And then you had that break up until COVID. When you got back into it, did you still have many of the cards from when you were a kid? I know it sounded like some of those very first ones, may have found their way into other collections, but did you, when you got back into it, were you starting with at least some of that collection you had when you were younger?
Well, I knew I had some reserves in my parents' cabin, back home, I suppose. I didn't have access to them. I actually took a trip last summer back to our home cabin, I suppose, for the first time in about 10 years. So I was able to grab everything that was left over. But I had to start from square one with just the memories. But like I said, man, I was so happy to at least it was only like a 350 count box or something like that. But I was able to get some of the gems from back in the day. And it's just amazing how your mind works. The condition of all those cards was so terrible. I remember taking them in and out of binder pages and top loaders and sorting and resorting the collection. And in your mind's eye, of course, you were so careful with everything. But picking them up nowadays, man, they are brutal.
So what does that collection look like now? Where are you at with your collecting focus? What are you just focused on the stuff from the junk wax era, or are you also picking more modern cards as well?
Well, when I very first started getting back into it, I was dabbling with modern, but I always ended up disappointed, man. I did not get very many good pulls. And frankly, I don't know a lot of the players nowadays. I'm not as up with the sports on a day-to-day basis as I was when I was a kid. But then, at the LCS, I happened to bump into some old boxes of junk wax. And I always have a fun time ripping junk wax, and I never feel like I get ripped off at the end of the day. So it's been so much fun to go back and start, pulling those rookies and Hall of Famers that you grew up with and just building back the collection. So I have a number of boxes of cards that I've pulled over the last couple of years. And I've also been curating a slab collection as well of just kind of the real favorites from the era.
So you're picking up both boxes and packs of the junk wax era stuff and opening it, but also picking up singles too?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been a pack junkie. When I was a kid at the LCS, man, I used to open up my packs in the counter. I would take out the best cards, trade them in, and buy more packs with the money. So ripping packs has always been my favorite part of the hobby. So it's not something I'm ever going to let die. But realizing in full that you're never going to get the cards you're looking for just pulling packs. So I've been able to dabble a little bit on both sides. But ripping the wax open, man, has always been where it's at for me.
It seems like you've also put together a nice collection of other pieces of memorabilia. Behind you, you've got several display boxes of wax from the era, some wrestling, some basketball, some football, basketball up there. You've a string of Beckett number ones, it looks like, maybe up on the top shelf. Tell me a little bit about the thought process that went by kind of building out your background there.
Well, this is my happy place, man. And it's funny enough, it all started with an IKEA Kallax bookshelf and thinking about what to put on it, I suppose. And then having a few wax boxes around. And actually, the owner of the local card shop happened to gift me a Jim McMahon starting lineup. I had done an episode on YouTube about 1983 Topps football, and I had bought the box from his shop. And he remembered that and watched it and ended up giving me the McMahon the next time I had visited. And that really kind of planted the seed, I guess, for starting lineups, man. And ever since then, I've been thinking about just cool ways to arrange. And I'm sure being from the era, video games and rip and wax were very intertwined back in the day. So those classic Nintendo games have a special spot in my heart, just like packs of cards. So being able to kind of put everything together to really represent, what childhood was like, man, it's been a lot of fun.
That's cool. Over these last few years, it seems like you've built quite a little community on Twitter. You've built quite a following there based on the type of content that you're sharing. Talk to me a little bit about the thought process that goes into building a Twitter community. What was the inspiration for that? And kind of what keeps you going when you think about the types of things that you want to share on there?
I mean, ultimately, it just comes down to loving what I'm doing, man. I just have a lot of fun with it. So whether or not it works out one way or the other, I'm enjoying myself, and that's the most important thing, I suppose. But as you post more and more, you see what resonates with people. I think in general that the junk wax era is a little underappreciated, just in the hobby in general. People talk down on it a lot. But I think one of the benefits is, frankly, is you can build a whole new collection, and it's not incredibly expensive. You're not caught up with the COVID bubble of modern release prices and stuff like that. So when I sit down to try and think about what sort of content that I want to promote, I really just go back to my childhood and I think about the mindset that I had, what I enjoyed doing, the things that that made me crazy back in the day, and then just kind of go through the memory banks, think about what was important to me, what was important to other people, and then just try and put something out there and see what sticks with people. And then once you find kind of what resonates with people, you can build on that and stick with what works and kind of roll back what doesn't.
That's cool. Have you also attempted to, build that community or share some of that on Instagram or Threads or YouTube or some other platforms as well?
Well, I started on YouTube, but that was a tough nut to crack for me. It was a lot of work, which I really enjoyed, all of the video editing and stuff like that. But I just never really seemed to resonate with that community in the same way that I have on Twitter. And it just seemed like maybe there was a void that needed to be filled. I know there are some other great, junk wax creators like Dub Mentality out there doing great stuff. Mario Baseball does a lot of older stuff as well. So there are guys kind of scratching that itch, but to have somebody just kind of dedicated on a day-to-day basis, there aren't many of us around. And I think guys from the era, we're sick of feeling like the redheaded stepchild in the hobby, man. You got vintage collectors, you got modern collectors, and we're kind of stuck in the middle with everybody telling us it's worthless. Memories aren't worthless, man, and that's what I'm all about. So that's where I'm having fun.
What do you enjoy most about Twitter and the interactions that you have there?
I think it's the immediacy of the whole thing. And it's a very pull yourself up by your own bootstraps platform. When you're on Facebook, when you're on Twitter, there are algorithms involved that seem almost anti-competitive, or they're trying to cater to a certain viewpoint. But Twitter, it really seems like it's up to what people like and repost, and really, again, what resonates with them. And it's been easier to connect with people too. With YouTube, I'm talking to you, you're not talking to me. There's no real back and forth. I mean, there's comments and stuff, but it's not in real time. In Twitter, it's a very immediate process. So we're speaking kind of back and forth, sometimes within a few seconds of each other and stuff like that. And it's more like a conversation than it is kind of like a dictation.
Yeah, that's cool. Back to your collection. I want to hit on this before we go today. You're continuing to build that collection out. Do you have kind of a list of some key cards, some of your kind of grail pieces that you want to track down to make that collection complete, or even just to keep it progressing in the way that you want? Do you have kind of a checklist that you use to kind of focus in on what you're going to go after next?
Yeah, I always got something in the hopper. I suppose lately, frankly, I've been buying a lot of starting lineups, trying to fill out the shelf. So I got maybe another 20 of those literally coming in the next couple of weeks. But I've got a couple of cards on my radar. The next card that I'm really looking at is that 1989 Pro Set Santa Claus promo with coming into the holiday season. I think that's my next target.
Yeah, that'll be a cool one. Will you go after it graded, or will you go after it raw, or what's your approach for that?
I think I got a PSA 9 in my future somewhere, man.
All right, very, very cool. Well, hey, if people want to connect with you, if people out there listening to this episode aren't already familiar with you, give everybody the place to go to get in touch with you or to follow along with what you're doing.
Sure, man. So I am on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it nowadays, man. I am at Junk Wax Heroes, and that's it, man. That's my platform. I know other people branch out. I've been on YouTube and stuff like that, but Twitter is really where I enjoy my time and spend time with the community. So hit me up on Twitter, guys, and I'll see you there.
And I would definitely recommend that you do. If you have any, affection for the junk wax era at all, you want to go and follow Junk Wax Heroes. Well, hey, I appreciate you coming on today and sharing a little bit about your collection, your focus, and your Twitter account. So thanks again for coming on.
Thanks so much for having me, man. I had a lot of fun.